Once upon a time, in the early 19th century, a young girl named Jane Eyre was born into unfortunate circumstances. The novel opens with Jane reading alone in the breakfast room, hoping she can find peace away from the Reed family. However, this doesn't last, as Master John Reed arrives, wanting to torment Jane. He taunts Jane by calling her a rat, claiming she is poor, ungrateful, and as she depends on his mother's wealth, a beggar. Jane retaliates and a fight breaks out. Mrs. Reed arrives with her servants to stop the fight and orders Jane to be taken and locked in the Red Room. The Red Room is a haunted room in the household, and it is here that Jane believes she meets her uncle's ghost. She is terrified by this and bangs on the door, wanting to be let out, but no one comes for her. Jane suffers a fever and it nearly kills her. Her parents had died when she was young, and she was left to live with her cruel aunt and cousins, who treated her as an outsider and often punished her for no reason. Despite her hardships, Jane was a determined and intelligent girl who loved to read and learn. When Jane turned 10, her aunt decided to send her away to a harsh boarding school called Lowood, where the conditions were poor and the teachers were strict, a school run by the cruel Mr. Brocklehurst. She tells him that Jane must be punished, and Brocklehurst relishes any opportunity to punish Jane in front of her peers. Conditions at the school are not very good. Illness is rife and there isn't enough food or water for the girls. Jane makes her first friend and, for the first time in her life, understands the value of friendship and love. Tragically, Helen Burns, Jane's best friend, dies of consumption and Jane is there with her until her death, refusing to leave her side. However, Jane found a kindred spirit in one of the teachers, Miss Temple, who encouraged her to continue her studies and helped her gain confidence in herself. Soon after, the school is taken over by some kind and sympathetic gentleman, thus improving the conditions. Jane later becomes a teacher there. Years later, Jane decides to leave Lowood School and applies for a governess position. She gets the position and moves to Thornfield Hall, where she looks after and teaches Adele, a lively French girl. After a few months, Jane meets Rochester, the owner of the estate, and her boss, who was captivated by Jane's wit and intelligence. She finds him aloof and rude, yet intelligent and sharp. Despite their differences in social status, Jane and Mr. Rochester fell deeply in love with each other. She begins fantasizing about what life would be like with him. But their happiness was short-lived. During the night, a fire breaks out at Thornfield, nearly killing Rochester as he sleeps. Jane raises the alarm and saves Rochester by putting out the fire. Rochester thanks Jane and leaves her wondering who started the fire. The next morning, Rochester claims it was Grace Poole, his alcoholic servant. However, Jane isn't convinced by Rochester's story and is convinced Grace Poole didn't start the fire, as she hasn't been dismissed by Rochester. Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper at Thornfield, announces that Rochester is expecting guests. The household are extremely excited and anxious, as they haven't had guests to the household for years. Preparations get underway to prepare for the party's arrival. A party of guests arrive, including the beautiful Blanche Ingram, who it is rumored Rochester will marry. Jane becomes heartbroken at this news and awaits the marriage proposal, supposing that Rochester loves Blanche. Rather than proposing to Blanche, Rochester confesses his love for Jane and asks her to marry him. Jane is shocked and does not believe him at first but eventually accepts. They prepare for their marriage, Rochester insisting that he wants to marry quickly and quietly. On the day of their wedding, Mr. Mason arrives at the church and declares that Rochester cannot marry as he is already married to his sister, Bertha Mason. Rochester confirms the story by taking Jane to the attic to see his wife, who is mentally unstable and prone to violence. Rochester exclaims that despite his marriage, he still wants to be with Jane and they could still live together. Jane locks herself in her room, away from everyone so she can think and decide what to do. Jane decides that she cannot be with Rochester, as he is already married. She stays true to her principles and decides to run away, becoming homeless in the process. Jane's experiences during this time were grueling and heartbreaking. She was forced to endure poverty, hunger, and isolation, with no one to turn to for help. Her spirit was broken, and she became deeply depressed, longing for the love and security that she had once known. She forages for food in villages and journeys away from Thornfield Hall, hoping Rochester will never find her. When she is hungry, delirious, and close to death, the Rivers family takes her in and nurses her back to health. When she gets better, Jane becomes a schoolmistress in the village. St. John Rivers, the brother in the Rivers family, arrives at Jane's school to announce that her uncle has died, leaving his wealth and estate to her. John also reveals that Jane's uncle is also his, making them cousins. Jane is overwhelmed and rejoices that she has family, splitting the inheritance between them. St. John decides to undertake missionary work in India. He asks Jane to accompany him and she agrees. However, St. John suggests they should be married for their journey. Jane reluctantly accepts. However, she could never forget her love for Mr. Rochester. When she hears Rochester calling her name in the night, she decides she cannot marry someone she doesn't love. Jane contemplates her supernatural experience of the previous night, wondering whether it was really Rochester's voice that she heard calling to her and whether Rochester might actually be in trouble. Upon hearing Rochester's voice, Jane returns to Thornfield. When she arrives, she discovers it has burnt down. Jane suspects the worst, that everyone in the household has died, including Rochester. Jane nursed Mr. Rochester back to health and they were able to be together again. She soon hears the truth, that Bertha burnt the hall down and Rochester, in his attempt to save her, became blind and lost his hand. Jane makes the journey to Ferndean to see Rochester. As he has lost his sight, he believes he is imagining Jane's voice. He is overwhelmed that she is there, breaking down and confessing his love for her. Jane was devastated by what she found. Mr. Rochester was blind and helpless, and the love they had once shared seemed impossible to rekindle. But Jane's love for him was unwavering, and she resolved to stay by his side and nurse him back to health. She devoted herself to caring for him, reading to him, and talking to him, even though he could not see or hear her. Jane's story is one of hope and resilience. She endured hardships and heartbreak, but she never lost sight of her own worth and her capacity to love. Her story is a testament to the human spirit, to the power of love, and to the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a better future. Jane and Mr. Rochester's love continued to grow stronger as they spent more time together. Although he was blind, Mr. Rochester could still sense Jane's presence and was grateful for her companionship. She read to him every day, describing the world around them and sharing her thoughts and feelings. They talked about their past and their future, dreaming of a life together in which they could love each other freely and without shame. Eventually, Mr. Rochester's health improved, and they decided to leave Thornfield Hall and start a new life together. They traveled to a secluded cottage in the countryside, where they could live in peace and privacy. Although they faced many challenges along the way, including financial difficulties and societal pressures, they never wavered in their love for each other. They remained devoted and loyal, supporting each other through thick and thin. As they settled into their new life, Jane reflected on her journey and how far she had come. She realized that her experiences had shaped her into a strong, independent woman who could overcome any obstacle. She was grateful for the love and support of her friends and family, and for the opportunities that had come her way. Most of all, she was grateful for Mr. Rochester, who had shown her the true meaning of love and had never given up on her. As the years went by, Jane and Mr. Rochester grew old together, surrounded by the memories of their life together. They continued to love and cherish each other, even as their bodies grew weaker and their minds grew cloudier. They knew that their love was eternal and that nothing could ever come between them. In the end, Jane realized that her life had been a remarkable journey, full of twists and turns, joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures. But through it all, she had remained true to herself and to the people she loved. Her story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of love, and to the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a better future. As Jane and Mr. Rochester grew older, their love continued to inspire those around them. They became known in their community as a couple who had overcome great obstacles to find true happiness together. People looked up to them and admired their devotion to each other. In the end, when Mr. Rochester eventually passed away, Jane was heartbroken. She mourned the loss of her beloved husband and felt a deep sense of loneliness. But even in her grief, she knew that their love would live on, that it had transcended time and space. In the years that followed, Jane continued to live a fulfilling life, surrounded by friends and family. She devoted herself to charitable causes and became a respected member of her community. She never forgot the lessons she had learned on her journey, and she continued to inspire others with her courage and strength. As she looked back on her life, Jane realized that she had experienced more joy and love than she ever thought possible. She had overcome great obstacles, but she had also experienced great happiness. She knew that life was a journey full of surprises, and that the key to finding true happiness was to remain open to the possibilities that lay ahead. In her relationship with Mr. Rochester, Jane struggled with the idea that their different social classes would prevent them from being together. She knew that society would never accept their love and that they would be looked down upon if they were to marry. But despite these challenges, Jane refused to give up on her love for Mr. Rochester. She believed that their love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle and that they deserved to be happy together. Jane's determination to be independent and to follow her heart paid off. She was able to overcome the barriers of social class and find true love and happiness with Mr. Rochester. Despite these challenges, Jane refused to let her social class define her. She was determined to make her own way in the world, to be independent and self-reliant. She pursued an education and worked hard to become a governess, which was a respectable profession for a woman at that time. Her journey was a testament to the human spirit, to the power of love, and to the belief that anything is possible if you believe in yourself and in the people around you.